Shabahen Maras had Yoites, he would show the simple people this tablet, he would show them the different forms of the moon, and he would say, did the moon look like this or did it look like that? These simple people didn't know how to describe how the moon looked, and therefore he would show them these different forms. Did it look like this? Did it look like that? And therefore would make it easy for them to testify. Ask the Gemara, Mishari, is it even permitted for him to have these forms of the moon? The pasuk says, Loi sasun iti, and what do we learn from here? Loi sasun kudmus shamashai. You're not allowed to make like the form of something that serves me, says Hashem. And since the moon is something that serves Hashem, you're not allowed to make a form, you're not allowed to make the image of the moon. So how is it that he even had an image of the moon in his house or in his room? So Rabbi, he answers, Loi asar Torah el shamashin she'efshar lasus kamaisan. The Torah only answered making a form or an image of something that serves Hashem that we could possibly replicate. Kedatan, you have a brayso. Lo yasa adam bayis. A person is not allowed to build a house, tavnis heichal, in a way that it looks like the heichal of the Beis Hamikdash, or achsadra tavnis ulam, in a way that it looks like the ulam of the Beis Hamikdash, or he's not even make a chatzor keneged azara, looking like the azara of the Beis Hamikdash, or shulchan, his table keneged shulchan, like the shulchan of the Beis Hamikdash, and menorah keneged menorah, he's not allowed to make a menorah like the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash. Aval oisa chafta on Beis Hatap shel chamisha v'shel shisha v'shel shmeina. He is allowed to make a menorah that has 5, 6, or 8 branches. He's just not allowed to make a menorah out of 7 branches. And v'shel shiva lo yasa, he's not allowed to even make a menorah that has 7 branches. Afilu shel shamine matachas, even if it's made out of other metals, even though it's not gold. And Rabbi Yehuda, he says, Afshel eitz lo yasa, he's not allowed to even make a 7-branched menorah out of wood. Because the kings of the Chashmonean dynasty, they made it the menorah of the Beis Hamikdash out of wood. So Amrullah, they told Rabbi Yehuda, he had said, you're not allowed to make a 7-branched menorah out of wood because that's what they made in Malchus Beit Chashmonai. That's not really so. Misham Raya, it's a Raya from there. Shpudin Shabarzal Hayu, their menorah was actually made out of iron spits, and V'chipam Babatz, they covered it with tin, and tin looks like wood. Hashiru, they became a little bit wealthy, Asom Shalkasif, so then they made it out of silver. Chazu Hashiru, they became even wealthier, Asom Shalzav, so then they made it out of gold. But you don't necessarily have a Raya from there that you're not allowed to make a 7-branched menorah out of wood. But what do we see from here? You're only not allowed to make the image of something that you can mistake for the real thing. However, making an image of the moon, you're never going to mistake it for the real moon, and therefore there's no issue of having that. The Gemara asks, is it really permitted to make an image that you cannot possibly mistake for the real thing? But Tanya, we have a brayso that says, the pasuk tells us, you're not allowed to make the form or the image of something that serves me, one of my servants, up in the marin, up in the heavens, meaning you're not allowed to even make the form of a moon. So Rabbi, he says, the Torah is only answering making the form of something that serves Hashem up in heaven is the dmus, is the form of the 4 faces. There's 4 faces underneath Hashem's kisei hakavod. You're not allowed to make that form altogether. But the moon is not a problem. The Gemara asks, Elameata parts of Adam l'chudei tishri. Does that mean that you are allowed to make the form of a person's face and that's okay? Alamatanya, why do we have a brayso that says, Kol partzufas mutar, you're allowed to make the image of any face, chutz mi parts of Adam, except for the face of a man. So Amar Avhuna Brei David, he says, I heard from the Drosh of Abai, Loi sasun iti, what does that mean? Loi sasun oisi, you're not allowed to make me, says Hashem. And sometimes we speak of Hashem as having a human face, and therefore you're not allowed to make a human face. So according to what we just learned, you're not allowed to make a human face, and you're also not allowed to make the form of the 4 faces that are under the kisei hakavod. However, the moon you technically should be allowed to make. The Gemara continues asking, is it really permitted to make the image or the form of any of Hashem's servants even up in Shemayim? But Tanya, we have a brayso. Loi sasun iti, the pasuk says, Loi sasun k'dmus shamashai hamishamshim l'fanei b'marim. You're not allowed to make the form or the image of the servants that serve me up in Marim, up in Shemayim, up in the heavens. Kigain, for example, Ifanim, Usrafim, V'chayis HaKodesh, Malachei Hasharis, all these different angels that are up in Shemayim, you're not allowed to make any of their forms. And by that same token, it should be that it's also to make the form of the moon as well, because that's up in the Marim. So Rabbi says, the only Isra of making these forms is those that serve Hashem, and they're in the upper chambers, in the upper heavens. But if they're in the lower chambers or the lower heavens, for example, the moon, sun, stars, and whatnot, so then that should be permitted. The Gemara continues asking, even if it's in the lower chambers, the lower heavens, that's permitted. But Tanya, you have a brayso. It says in the pasuk, Asher b'shamayim l'rabbis, that's including chama u'levana k'chav mazalais, sun, moon, stars, and constellations. It is also to make their form. Mimal, what does that teach us? The rabbis malachei hasharis, you're not allowed to even make the form of malachim. So we see that you're not allowed to make the form of a moon either. So the Gemara says, no, kitanya he, that was teaching la'avdam. If you want to make it in order to serve it, so then it's usher. The Gemara asks, la'avdam, if you want to make it to serve it, afilu shilshal katan nami, even if it's a small little worm, you're not allowed to make that form. The Gemara says, you're right, enechanami, 100%. The Tanya, we have a brayso. Asher ba'aretz, what does that teach us? The rabbis harim, ugvayis, yamim, unaharis, afikim, v'gayis. That includes mountains, hills, seas, rivers, streams, and valleys. Mitachas, what does that teach us? The rabbis shilshal katan, that includes even a small little worm. If you're making that image to serve it, so then it's usher. But what do we see from here? If you want to make a moon, but you're not going to serve it, so it should be permitted. The Gemara continues asking, even if you just want to make it and you're not making it to serve it, is it permitted? But Tanya, we have a brayso. Lo yisasun iti. What does the pasuk teach us? Lo yisasun kinvus shamashay hamisham shemufanayi kigayin, for example, cham ulavana kechav mazalos. So the Brisa says very clearly that you're not allowed to make the form of the sun or the moon, stars or constellations. So finally, the Gemara has an answer. Shani Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel is different. He was allowed to have these forms of the moon because the acherim asulai, others made it for him, and if others made it for him, he didn't make it himself, so he's allowed to have it. The Gemara asks about Rabbi Yehuda the acherim asulai. Rabbi Yehuda had a signet ring that others made him the signet ring. And Amalei Shmuel Rabbi Yehuda. Shmuel told Rabbi Yehuda, Shinina, sharp one. Shmuel would call Rabbi Yehuda sharp one. Sami ene didain. You have to blind its eye, meaning you have to ruin this form on your signet ring because you're not allowed to have it, even though someone else made it for you. So the Gemara answers that the ring of Rabbi Yehuda was different. Hasam over there, the signet of the ring was actually protruding, and Umishom Chashada, the reason why he's not allowed to have it is because people are going to suspect him that he's serving Avodah Zarah. The Avodah Zarah they would serve was only something that had a protruding form. Kedetani, we have a brayso. If you have a signet ring and the signet is protruding, so you're not allowed to wear it on your finger. Lahanicha means you're not allowed to wear it on your finger because people are going to suspect you of doing Avodah Zarah, but you are allowed to sign with it, because when you sign with it, so then you're imprinting an image into the wax, and that image is not protruding, it's depressed into the wax. If the form of the signet is set into it, so you're allowed to wear it, but you're not allowed to sign with it, because when you seal the wax with it, so now the image that comes out is going to be protruding, and you're not allowed to do that. As I go, do we really have to be worried that people are going to suspect you that you're doing Avodah Zarah in such a case? There was a base Knesset, there was a shul that was called Shafi Yosef, and it was in Arda, the Hava Bey Andarta, and it had a statue in it. It was a statue of the king, and the reason why they did it was for Shalom, was for peace purposes. And V'hava Ali Rav Shmuel Vavud Shmuel V'Levi Umatzu Hasam, and Rav and Shmuel and the father of Shmuel and Levi, they all went into that shul and they davened there, and they weren't afraid that people were going to suspect them that they're doing Avodah Zarah, that they're bowing down to the statue. So the Gemara says, Rabbim Shani, when we're dealing with a lot of people, it's a shul, a lot of people are davening there, we don't have to be afraid that people are going to suspect you're doing Avodah Zarah. So the Gemara asks, if so, Rabbi Gamliel Yachadu, Rabbi Gamliel, he's an individual, so we should have this issue of chashad, people are going to suspect him he's doing Avodah Zarah, so he shouldn't be allowed to have these images of the moon. The Gemara answers, Kivan to Nasihu, since he's the Nasi, he's the leader of Klal Yisrael, Shchichi Ram Gabe, so many people are by him, so it's considered like Rabbim. Alternatively, we could say the Prakim Hava, that actually these moon forms that he had, they were made up into sections, and he would only piece them together to show the potential witnesses what type of moon did they see, and then he would dismantle it, so that's not a problem. Alternatively, he made them himself, and he just wanted to learn from them what are these images of the moon. It says the pasuk, you're not allowed to learn from the Gentiles, you're not allowed to learn about their Avodah Zarah and all their asur practices in order to perform them. La'asos means to perform it. You are allowed to learn from them, even though you're learning about Avodah Zarah and things like that. You're allowed to learn it to be able to understand it and to be able to paskin, and that's the reason why Rabbi Gamliel had them. He just wanted to be able to learn so he could paskin about Kiddush HaChodesh, and therefore it was permitted for him to have these moon forms in his room. We're going to stop here for the day. Pick up with a fresh Mishnah tomorrow. For now,
everyone should have a wonderful day.